Please welcome to the stage today our guest, Barry Meier.
Thanks. Thanks, Kate. Thanks for everyone at Google for having me here. And thanks to all of you for coming. I've been a journalist at the New York Times for over 25 years. And people often ask me, you know, why did you become a journalist? And the truth is, I did it after I failed at a couple of things. And one of the things I really failed spectacularly at was being a fiction writer. When I was in my early 20s, I really wanted to be a suspense writer, someone that wrote mystery and crime novels, because I had grown up loving those kinds of books. I read people like Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and James M. Cain and Jean le Carré. And I loved those stories both for their excitement and the kind of ambiguity of the morality of the stories. It was often very difficult to tell who the good guys were, who the bad guys were. And I thought, you know, hey, this can't be too hard. You know, I should be able to do this. So I spent a year in my early 20s in what was then a very cheap apartment in Little Italy, something I know that doesn't exist anymore. And I, you know, spent every day sitting at a table with then the preferred writing implement of its time, a manual typewriter, and, you know, click-clacking away for 5 or 6 hours and writing what I thought was like a really great novel. And it was set, kind of the climatic scene of this novel was set on what was the old West Side Highway. I don't know if any of you have ever saw it when it was in existence, but, you know, along what was now West Street was an elevated highway. Where you could drive from lower Manhattan all the way up to, you know, the Henry Hudson Parkway, and you'd pass all the piers and ships that used to line the west side of Manhattan. And in the 1970s, I believe, during the financial crisis here in New York, they decided not to paint the underside of the West Side Highway, and one day sections of it collapsed. So basically, it was not useful for cars anymore, but it became really this incredible urban walkway where you could walk from lower Manhattan along the now decrepit West Side Highway up to Central Park, or ride your bicycle along the old West Side Highway, and it was really a fantastic place. So I had this scene where the climax of my book was taking place set on the West Side Highway. And basically, I kind of pictured it sort of like a high noon scene out of a Western novel where, you know, the good guy was approaching from one end of the highway and the bad guy was approaching from the other end of the highway, and there was like the shootout that took place. And I figured, man, this is just like fantastic, you know, like people are gonna eat this novel up. Sadly, that didn't turn out to be the case. I mean, it was roundly rejected by every publisher who I brought it to, and it is now in the bottom of a closet somewhere in my apartment. If any of you are interested or know people in the publishing industry who might like to buy it, you know, you can come see me afterwards. So fast forward 25, 30 years, I'm at the New York Times. Prior to the Times, I had worked both at the Wall Street Journal and at New York Newsday, another newspaper here in New York City. And I'd spent a large majority of my career as an investigative reporter. And one of the things that I had sort of specialized in investigating were problems with drugs, problems with medical devices or surgical procedures. I was the first reporter that wrote extensively about the drug OxyContin. This is about 15 years ago when it was first kind of appearing as hillbilly heroin in Appalachia and other places, and then wrote a book called Painkiller, which kind of traced the story of this drug and prescription drug abuse and this really fascinating family, the Sackler family, that ran the company that produced OxyContin. And one of the things that is sort of like both one of the benefits and the downsides of being an investigative reporter is that your bosses give you a lot of leeway to pursue subjects of interest to you, and they are like really happy if those stories work out. You know, if you win awards, you get a lot of slaps on the backs, occasionally a raise, and you're then allowed to continue on and pursue whatever story you want to pursue. The big downside is that there are these kind of lull periods where you can't find a story, and you begin to worry that, oh my God, they're going to realize that I've kind of been a fraud for the last 20 years. You know, the secret's going to be out that I've kind of been scamming them. I've been coming up with these stories, and it's all been luck, and I've kind of been living by my wits, and now it's all going to come to a crashing end. And it was really kind of the sort of state that I was in 2007. I just won a couple of notable awards for doing a series of stories about a defective heart device and got the typical pats on the back. And then I was thinking, you know, I'm really sick of doing medical stuff. Let me see if I can find something else to do. So month after month after month went by. I was looking for stories, I was trying to find things, and I was really starting to get desperate, you know, and I also saw the looks in my editor's eyes, or thought I saw the looks in my editor's eyes, kind of looking at me and saying, you know, like, what's Barry doing? Why isn't he doing anything? Do we need to kind of call him in and have like a talk with him? So I was walking around the newsroom one day, and I was so desperate to find something that I picked up a copy of the Financial Times, which is like an English newspaper, covers business. I never read it. I mean, I'd be more likely to pick up a copy of the Post or the Daily News than the Financial Times. And what was like so pathetic about this was the fact that it wasn't even that day's Financial Times. It was probably 6 months old. But that was the kind of, you know, state that I was in. And as I'm kind of thumbing through this newspaper, I see a story that catches my attention. And the story basically reports that a former FBI agent turned private investigator has disappeared in Iran while he was investigating a case involving smuggled counterfeit cigarettes. And I thought, this sounds kind of cool. You know, like, I know something about the tobacco industry. I had covered all the litigation between the state attorney generals and the tobacco companies back in the late 1990s and early 2000s when states were suing tobacco companies. And I knew people that were involved in the private detectives that worked on counterfeit cigarette cases. And then, like, I continued reading the story further, and there was this other line in the story that talked about how this gentleman by the name of Robert Levinson had disappeared while he was meeting in Iran with a fugitive American murderer. You know, a black American who had fled to Iran in 1980 during the sort of height of the Iranian Revolution, after he had assassinated a former aide to the Shah of Iran outside that person's home in Washington, D.C. This person's name was Dawood Salahuddin. That's the name that he adopted after fleeing to Iran. And I thought to myself, wow, this sounds incredibly cool. This is my ticket. This is like my, you know, a lifesaver for me. This is in 2007, the fall of 2007, and it's already about 6 months after this episode has taken place. And I figured, okay, I'm going to go to my editors, I'm going to lay claim to the story, And sort of like the bonus of the story is the Times is going to pay for me to travel to all kinds of cool places. I'll get to go to Dubai. I really want to see those islands that look like palm trees. I'll get to go to Iran. I mean, how many people get to go to Iran and have their employer pay for it? And I'm thinking, like, not only do I have a good story here, I have like the best of both worlds, because the Times is going to go pay for me to see all these exotic places. So I kind of make this pitch. My editors, they're a little skeptical, but they seem kind of vaguely interested. And I figured, phew, I'm saved. I've got it going. I'm good. Okay, full speed ahead. So I start calling these private investigators that I know who work in the area of smuggled cigarettes. And I tell them the story, and I get the same thing back from them, which is basically, this sounds totally crazy. There is no way under the sun that we would ever send a former FBI agent, basically a big fat white guy with a Jewish last name, to Iran to investigate a case. If we were going to investigate a case in Iran, we would send in a local, someone who looked Iranian, who was Iranian, who spoke Farsi, who could blend in to Iran. I mean, like, there's just no way. I mean, all you would be doing is like inviting trouble by sending in a former FBI agent to investigate a case in Iran. And I have to say, I came away from those conversations a bit depressed. I figured, oh my God, I've kind of like, now I've really dug a deep hole for myself. I've like told them about this story. I've like prepared it, made it sound really exciting to them. And now I've got to go in and look like a dope and say, you know what, I was wrong, blah, blah, blah. And I figured, this is it. This is the end of my career. So I kind of like, I guess I got depressed and kind of moped around for another week or two. And then I get this phone call. And the phone call is from a guy that I know, another journalist who worked for the Times for a period of time, who I was friendly with, who says to me, I understand you're like poking around the Levinson story. I have no idea how he knew about that. But he says to me, there's nothing going on there. I wouldn't really like pay any attention to it. But if you're interested in it, I know someone who knows something about Levinson who might be willing to help you. He's a former television producer, retired television producer by the name of Ira Silverman. So maybe, if you want, I can let him know you're calling, and you can call him. So I figured, okay, at this point I've got nothing to lose. So I call Ira Silverman, we start chatting, and he's acting like very hush-hush, conspiratorial. There's like something he wants to tell me, but it's so secret and so sensitive. I've got to like double promise on, the life of everyone I've known in this life and possibly every previous life I've lived before he will share the secret with me. And so I do that, and he tells me that Bob Levinson works for the CIA, and he went to Iran on a mission for the CIA. And I'm thinking to myself, either this guy is like really crazy, or this guy is telling me something that's amazing. And so I talked to Ira a little bit more, and Ira tells me that, the family is frantic. They haven't heard anything about Bob or his fate ever since he's disappeared. The FBI doesn't seem to be investigating his disappearance, and the CIA has said nothing to the family about what's happened to Bob. And I say, okay, and he says to me, well, I'm coming to New York, and I'm coming to New York with a lawyer for the family, a guy by the name of Dave McGee, and we'd be very eager to meet with you. So I said, sure, this is great. And so I meet with them around Thanksgiving of 2007, and they show me a contract that Bob has. It actually shows that Bob Levinson was at a certain point a consultant for the CIA. And I don't know, is there anyone here that you guys do a lot of spooky stuff who has worked for the CIA or doesn't want to admit to people around you that they work for the CIA? But if no one's raised their hand, okay. So as you may know, there are two parts to the CIA. There's like the spy side, the people who go out and work abroad doing spying. That's called like basically the Division of Clandestine Operations, or now that's called the National Secrecy something or other. And then there's the analytical side, which is called the Directorate of Intelligence. And the analytical side basically are people that work at desks, and other parts of the government come to them and say, well, we want to know what's going on in Iran, or we want to know what's going on with Russia, or we want to know about, you know, Russian economic policies or military policies. And these people are like kind of like these really brilliant nerds who, you know, come and become like research moles inside the CIA. They're like graduate students for life who get to like examine and research stuff. And then they write up reports that are forwarded to various government officials. And Bob's contract was with a division within this analytical side of the CIA called the Illicit Finance Group. And the sort of supposed role of the Illicit Finance Group was to like follow like money laundering and illicit financial transfers involving countries like Iran or North Korea, organized crime groups, or Russian criminals, or folks like that. So there was a clear contract that Ira and Dave showed me, showing that Bob worked for this group and had been hired by this group as an outside contractor, and they believed that Bob had been sent to Iran by this group to try to recruit the fugitive American there, Dawood Salahuddin, as a source inside Iran for the CIA. Because bear in mind, in 2007, the United States and Iran are almost at war with each other. You've had President Ahmadinejad has just become president of Iran. He has restarted Iran's nuclear program. There is this raging conflict going on in Iraq. And Iran, according to the U.S. government, is like arming these militants in Iraq who are killing American soldiers there. The Bush administration is about to clamp down with sanctions against Iran. So basically, the United States and Iran are on a real collision course, and there's a great desire to have information about Iran. So I'm going to stop for a moment and read you. So let me just, so they're looking for a reporter who's going to try to find out what's going on at the FBI, at the CIA, give some aid and comfort to the family, try to find out what happened to Bob. And I say to them, look, I'm happy to do that, but I can't go just on the basis of what you're saying to me. You know, I need to know more. Are there more documents that you have that that kind of talk to Bob's involvement with the CIA? And they said, well, Bob's wife, Christine, has all of Bob's records, but she hasn't shared them with us yet. And I said, why not? She said, well, you know, her husband's disappeared. They have 7 children. She's in a state of panic. I mean, they don't know what's happened to this guy. They don't know what to do. And I said, look, I'm willing to like do what I can. I'm willing to go to the ends of the earth to follow this story. But I need Christine to allow me to see these documents. So they speak with Christine. A couple of weeks later, I fly down to Dave McGee's office in Pensacola, walk into a conference room. There is like, you know, a reporter's dream awaits me. There are like 10 crammed cardboard boxes filled with Bob Levinson's files, including all the reports he's made to the CIA, all the emails that he sent between the CIA and his handlers, lots of other files involving other cases that he's worked on, and those files, those emails, that information become the basis that begins this reporting trail that starts in 2007 for me, will go on for 6 years, 6 or 7 years, and ultimately result in the writing of Missing Man. So let me just read you now from the prologue of the book that will hopefully kind of set the scene for you and set up some of the characters for you. Rain splattered against the windshield of her silver gray BMW as Sonia Dobbs pulled up to a security gate blocking the street. It wasn't much of a gate, at least by Florida standards, just a long, rolling fence stretching across a road. She punched a code into the gate's keypad. After 2 unsuccessful tries, she used her cell phone to call her boss, David McGee, who opened the gate from inside his house. It slid back and Sonia drove through, a laptop resting on the passenger seat. Sonia's Saturday night had started very differently. She had planned to spend it sorting through photographs. Sonia worked as Dave's paralegal at a large law firm called Beggs & Lane, located in Pensacola, a city at the western end of Florida's Panhandle, the narrow 200-mile-long coastal strip tucked between the Gulf of Mexico and the states of Alabama and Georgia. Sonia wanted to carve out a second career as a photographer, and she had been on a chase boat the previous day in Pensacola Bay, snapping pictures of a new ocean-going tug, christened Freedom, as it went through test maneuvers. The photos showed the big black and gray tug slicing through the foamy water under a blue sky filled with white, puffy clouds. Sonia had been happily spending that Saturday evening playing with different ways to crop the images. Then the telephone rang, and she heard a familiar voice on the other end of the line. Over the past 3 years, she had spoken to Ira Silverman hundreds of times, if she had to guess. Most days, the retired television newspaper man phoned her at least once. Their conversation was always about a mutual friend, Robert Levinson, a former agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation turned private investigator. Sonia had never met him, though she felt as if she had. Bob disappeared in 2007 while on a trip to Iran. Dave and Ira, who had both known him for years, were trying to help his desperate family find him. Months after the investigator went missing, Dave convinced Bob's wife, Christine, to ship his work files to Beggs & Lane. Sonia had read through them and organized the reports. She was a natural snoop, at ease with computers. Before long, she had tracked down Bob's email accounts and figured out the passwords. As she walked through the records of his life, she learned a secret that Dave, Ira, and Chris already knew. The explanation that U.S. government officials were giving out publicly to explain Bob's reason for visiting Iran was true, at least not the part that really mattered. Since the investigator's disappearance, there have been reported sightings of him in Tehran's Evin prison, the notorious jail where political dissidents are tortured and killed. Some tipsters had come forward to claim that the Revolutionary Guards, the elite military force aligned with Iran's Islamic religious leaders, were holding him at a secret detention facility. His family had made public pleas for information about him, and the FBI had assigned agents to the search. But the hunt for the missing man had gone nowhere. Ira's call was about an email he had gotten earlier that Saturday evening, containing a message that read like a ransom note. He had received similar emails before and had passed them on to the FBI, but this one wasn't like the others. This email had a file attached to it. Ira told Sonia he couldn't figure out how to open the attachment and was forwarding it to her to see if she could. The email read, "This is a serious message. Until this time, we have prepared a good situation for Bob, and he is in good health. We announce for the last ultimatum that his life is based on and related to you. You should pay $3 million in cash and release our friends. We are waiting for your positive answer without any preconditions. We would announce our way to receive the money." Sonia clicked on the email's attachment, but nothing happened. She didn't recognize the file's extension, the 3-letter code that tells a computer which program is needed to open a file. She suspected the extension .flv signified it was a video file, and she hunted around on the internet for a player to download. She found one and downloaded the software and clicked again on the attachment. This time, the file launched, and a man's gaunt face appeared, seemingly staring out at her. He had closely shorn gray hair, a mustache, and sunken cheeks covered by stubble. He started speaking in a deep, raspy voice. Strange music played in the background, rhythmic instruments accompanied by a singer's droning call. After a few seconds, the camera pulled back, and Sonia could see that the man was sitting in front of a gray stone wall in what appeared to be a stark prison cell. The polo shirt he wore looked threadbare and hung on his frame as though it was several sizes too big for him. Part of the shirt's right sleeve was gone. There was nothing immediately threatening about the video. Masked jihadists weren't standing over the man, branding guns or swords, and there wasn't a black political banner hanging behind him. Still, the video was disquieting. The man's arms didn't move as he spoke, suggesting that his hands, which couldn't be seen in the video, might be lying manacled in his lap. He struggled to stay calm and to keep his words measured. Occasionally, his voice came close to breaking, and he would briefly close his eyes, pause, or gesture by turning his head. He said, for my beautiful, my loving wife, Christine, and my children, and my grandson, and also for the United States government. I have been held here for 3.5 years. I am not in very good health. I am running very quickly out of diabetes medicine. I have been treated well, but I need the help of the United States government to answer the requests of the group that has held me for 3.5 years. And please help me get home. 33 years of service to the United States deserves something. Please help me. Dave McGee opened his front door and ushered Sonia out of the rain. They went into the kitchen where the lawyer's wife, Joyce, was waiting. Sonia put her laptop on the table, opened it, and launched the video. Dave wasn't positive that Bob was the man on the tape. The last time he had seen the former FBI agent, he resembled a big, overweight teddy bear with a mop of hair. The man on the tape was so thin that the skin on his throat sagged. Dave realized that the only way to know for sure was to call Christine. Sonia dialed her number, and when Chris answered, she put her cell phone next to the computer and clicked on the video. A few moments passed. "That's Bob's voice," Chris said. "That's Bob." So that's the prologue for the book, and it sort of captures this moment in time in 2010, where after 3 years of nothing, 3 years of silence, 3 years where everyone involved with Bob's case, including the FBI, many of his friends, many people, including myself, believed that Bob was dead. It did not seem at all possible that Bob could have been kept somewhere secret, out of sight, out of view, there were Americans going in and out of prisons in Iran, but that Bob could be kept in some secret location and kept alive for this period of time. I remember very clearly where I was on that day, because my wife and I were in Brooklyn. We had been to our daughter's school for some sort of parent-teacher conference or some event, and I had said to her, like, when I agreed to receive all this information from the Levinson family, I had told them I would do nothing to jeopardize Bob's safety. That was sort of the agreement, the promise that I made to them. And I had spent years kind of tracking down the route that took Bob to Quiche Island, the people that the FBI had sort of recruited eventually to help search for him. And it was like this wild cast that I detailed in the book of, like arms dealers and criminals and Russian oligarchs and all these kinds of people who wanted something from the U.S. government as part of the help in the search for Bob. And I had come to the conclusion that day that there was no way that Bob Levinson could still be alive. And I told my wife that, I'm going to go into work on Monday. I'm going to tell my editors that it's probably time for us to run our story. And then I was at a restaurant that evening with some friends, and I got an email from Ira Silverman that had an attachment to it. And I excused myself. I went out and I looked at the email, and I opened the attachment, and what I saw was that videotape. And what I saw was evidence at that point in time that Bob Levinson was alive. And as someone who had followed this story, someone who had spent their life as a reporter, it also blew my mind, because it made me realize something that was dawning on me through the years that I was working on this story, was that I had entered myself into the shadow world, into this world of secrecy and criminality and surveillance and characters of moral ambiguity, where you might presume something was the case and you could never be sure it was the case, and any assumption you might make would soon be proven to be wrong. There was another piece of information showing Bob was alive, that came out about 4 months afterwards, in early 2011, a series of photographs that some of you may have seen on the news, which showed Bob, this time with very bushy hair and a big beard, kind of in this kind of faux orange jumpsuit, like a Guantánamo prisoner, holding signs that were very much of a political bent, saying, why haven't you come to get me? Why aren't you deserting me? Isn't my service to this country enough? And, the book follows this kind of behind-the-scenes search for Bob. The video also set off secret negotiations between the United States and Iran to try to learn about what happened to Bob. The United States came to believe during the course of those negotiations that that the Iranians were basically playing the United States, had basically taken Bob, and were using him in some ways as bait to try to better understand how the United States spies on Iran. Bob's fate was also a part of these recent nuclear negotiations. And U.S. officials continued to press their Iranian counterparts about Bob. And from the very beginning, from the day Bob disappeared in Iran to this very day, Iranian officials have claimed that they know nothing about what happened to Bob. They know nothing about how he disappeared on Kish. And, you know, obviously anyone with any working knowledge of Iran, or at least a little working knowledge of Iran, that I gained while working on this book, would find that explanation absurd. I mean, the Iranian government and the Iranian intelligence units have some of the most sophisticated surveillance systems in the world. They operate much like the Stasi did in Eastern Europe. They, you know, have neighbors spying on neighbors, taxi cab drivers acting as spies and reporting about foreigners, et cetera, who pick them up. And the idea that that elements within Iran, be it the Iranian government or the Iranian intelligence authorities, do not know what happened to Bob Levinson is beyond the pale. One of the things that also sort of became clear to me as I was working on the book, and also was sort of one of the more shocking and depressing aspects of it, is that in many ways our government does not care what happened to Bob Levinson. Over the course of my investigation, and much of which is detailed in the book, there is clear evidence of the Iranian involvement in Bob's disappearance. The FBI has been investigating this case for 8 or 9 years now, and has probably dossiers that would fill this room and go beyond it, of work they've done to try to gather evidence about what happened to Bob. And I believe if, you know, the head of the FBI was here today instead of me, and one of you asked him, do you believe that elements of Iran's intelligence hierarchy or religious hierarchy were involved in the capture and detention of Bob Levinson, he would have no alternative but to say yes, because that is what most FBI agents have told me they believe. But despite that belief, the Obama administration has done nothing to publicize the involvement of Iran, because sadly, they have a far broader and different agenda, which was the Iranian nuclear deal. And Bob Levinson, his case, potentially his life, his family's welfare, became sort of collateral damage to the pursuit of that deal. I mean, to the extent that when these recent hostages were released, or prisoners were released, they actually were hostages, not prisoners, since none of them had committed any crimes, by Iran in January, the Levinson family thought that, you know, initially thought that the United States State Department and government, White House officials were actively negotiating for Bob's release while they were negotiating for the release of these prisoners. And not only was the White House not negotiating on behalf of Bob Levinson, the way that the Levinson family, his wife and Bob's 7 children, found out about this release was the same way every American did. When they turned on the television one morning and they heard a news report that 4 Americans had been released by Iranians in exchange for Iranian prisoners held here in the United States. The Obama administration didn't even have the courtesy to call the Levinson family 15 minutes ahead of time to let them know that this husband and this father wasn't coming home. Now we know that $400 million was involved in the release of these American hostages. And one thing that I hope in months and weeks to come will be answered by congressmen or someone in authority is why Bob Levinson's fate was not part of these negotiations. I mean, we don't know whether Bob's alive, whether Bob perished, whether Bob was killed. But what we do know is that an American citizen was captured, detained, and possibly died at the hands of forces within Iran without any demands for accountability by this government. And I guess ultimately that's been one of the most shocking takeaways for me from being involved in this story. Anyway, they put a clock up there to make sure I don't run over too much time, and I think I'm about 24 seconds beyond what I was told, how long I was told to go. I could talk forever about this, but if any of you have any kinds of questions about Bob's story, what we know about him, what we don't know about him, the roles of the various governments in this saga, I'd be more than happy to take them. I guess there are microphones there if you have questions to ask.
So I'm only about 40% done with the book, so I don't know all the details.
Did I ruin it for you? I hope I didn't.
No,
Okay.
It's a real page turner so far, though, so I recommend you all pick it up. So you said that the U.S. government hasn't been working as hard as maybe they could or should be about its release, but isn't it like, even though everyone's gut says Iran does this, if they continue to deny at every turn that they know where he is, and there's no smoking gun, there's no like real proof that he did it, how far can the U.S. go? And I guess as sort of a follow-up, I was wondering how the Iranian government's public stance on this compares to other Americans who've been arrested there. Like, I believe in 2009, there were 3 hikers who were arrested. Like, how does their publicity, do they always have this wall of denial, or use it? Yeah.
They're both excellent questions. And as to the first one, since you're only 40% through the book, I won't ruin the fact for you that there are some smoking guns. And you'll get to one of them towards the end of the book. I've been told, along with that smoking gun, there's different types of evidence. There's evidence that you would go to court with to convict someone, right, beyond the shadow of a doubt. Then there's evidence that you could put on the table today that would point to an inescapable conclusion, that would be clear to anyone looking at that evidence that the conclusion, that there's no other possibility, no other reasonable possibility that elements within Iran were involved with Bob's disappearance and capture. And there is evidence of that nature both within the book and within the files of the FBI, because I have been specifically told that by FBI agents. FBI agents have said to me, the conclusions you reach in the book, which are essentially the conclusions I've just laid out to you, we are so glad that you did that because we are being prevented from saying that. And that's the dilemma right now. As to the other cases, it's very interesting. So there have been, over the years, a number of Iranian Americans. I know there's a young Iranian American woman in the audience today, so I will emphasize this for her benefit. The United States has made Iran has made a habit of arresting dual nationals because it does not recognize the part of their nationality that comes after the Iranian part. They consider Iranian Americans Iranians. They consider Iranian British citizens Iranians. And, but what's very interesting, and I think very, very illustrative in Bob's case, is that all those people were arrested and publicly charged with spying, like the hikers, despite the fact that there was no evidence that any of them were spying. Bob Levinson was, in the broadest definition of that word, a spy. He was there to spy. He was there to gather information for the United States government. He may have been there on a rogue mission, but he was there to spy. And the Iranian government pretended he didn't exist because they saw a value to him in being an actual spy that they didn't see in the people that they put on these phony show trials, spy show trials. So I hope that sort of answers that question.
Yes, it does. I guess I was just wondering, like, so they would go out and announce something about.
Yeah, they would announce like they arrest, the hikers. Hey, they're spies. They keep them in the regular prison system. They march them out. They pretend that there's some kind of judicial proceeding going on, that they're following the laws of Iran in indicting and prosecuting a spy. Bob never was in a prison. He was kept in some sort of black site like the CIA used to run. He was never brought into the judicial system. He was never charged in a courtroom. There was none of those proceedings took place. He was basically, they like put a bag over his head and took him off to some, secret place somewhere.
You mentioned you weren't sure if it was religious or government agents who were holding him. What exactly, or could you go into more depth about the religious groups there?
So basically, we think of the United States and we think about most Western countries as having a government. There's a single government, and that government acts, whether we agree with it or not, in some sort of cohesive way, right? So something happens, it's the United States government did it, or the CIA did it, or some formal government agency did it. Iran is a country that is filled with factions. So you have what we think of as the government, then you have these other factions over here like the Revolutionary Guards, and they have their own hierarchies. And then you have the religious groups, and the religious group, the religious hierarchy with the supreme leader at the head of it, have their own intelligence units. So you have these structures that are not common to us, but they're kind of structures that kind of operate sort of side by side with each other. Sometimes they operate in silos from one another. Sometimes they intersect with one another. And it's a very confusing situation, but it's very unlike what we're used to. Sir?
Does anyone know or suspect which group made the video?
No. I mean, what was very interesting is that there were great efforts made by whomever was making the video to mask who made it. For example, and to mask any suggestion that it was made by any organized group, be it in Iran or elsewhere. For example, one of the things that you will read about in the book is like what the FBI did to try to analyze the videotape. So one of the things, like as I mentioned in reading the prologue, there's like music playing in the background, right? And this music turns out to be like music from some tribal region in Afghanistan, right? Pashtun, it was a Pashtun wedding song. And the Pashto people are a large ethnic group of people that are in Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. And basically the purpose of that music, according to the FBI analysis, was both to mask, cover up any ambient noise that when they're deconstructing the tape, sometimes they can hear people on the street, planes overhead, and that can be used as a clue to try to identify the person's location. So it's both to mask that ambient noise and also to kind of throw out like a false flag clue as to where he might be held.
So you mentioned negotiations. Those negotiations were made with an unknown party?
I'm sorry, sir?
You mentioned negotiations. They were made with an unknown party?
No, they were made with the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence.
So that was separate from the video?
With the government of Iran, who claimed we don't know anything about him.
I see. Thanks.
Nothing, yeah. So those negotiations went nowhere. Sir?
Hello, I'm curious about your opinion. Do you feel like he's a real victim here, or do you feel like it's a he made his bed and he's lying in it situation, or somewhere in between?
I would say, it is somewhere in between. Bob Levinson's like a fascinating character. I mean, one of the things that to me, and this goes back to like my desire to be a fiction writer, one of the hardest things about being a fiction writer is creating characters, right? Like we like fiction when we find characters that we can relate to, that we get into, that sort of appeal to us. And they don't have to be always good. They can be complicated. And so like when I was given kind of Bob's character on a plate when I was given his reports and his emails, and his emails kind of form the dialogue in parts of this book. You kind of learn about him as a character through his reports and his emails and his interactions with people. And Bob, I guess, as sort of like slightly on the other side or middle, I'd like to think of myself psychologically that I'm still a middle-aged man. And Bob, who was in his late 50s at the time, it was fascinating to me because, we all come to a point in our life, or many of us do, where, the world is changing around us and we don't know whether what we've done, to make a living, to be relevant, is relevant anymore. And people become desperate, some people, to find ways to kind of keep their hand in the game. And that very much is where Bob Levinson found himself. When he started working for the CIA. He knew nothing about Iran. He knew nothing about the Middle East. His expertise in the FBI was with Russian organized crime. But he had 7 kids, so he had financial pressures. He was a person of pride who thought he was like a great investigator. And so he was willing to take a risk that I certainly would have never taken, where most people would have never dreamed of taking, but he decided to take that risk. So yes, in that sense, he did make his own bed, but it was a risk that to me kind of humanizes him.
Yeah, it spoke to you, that risk.
Yeah, it humanizes him. It makes him much more accessible than some James Bond guy who's like, oh well, I can do this. I'm a highfalutin spy. It humanizes him. It humanizes his story. I mean, and then, don't forget that as a country, as people, when somebody goes out and puts himself into danger, they go climb a mountain that they shouldn't be climbing, they go out in a boat into a rough sea, they throw caution to the wind. We don't abandon those people. We don't abandon them. We try to find them. We try to rescue them. We try to do what we can to save them, particularly in a case like this, where whether you think what he did was right or wrong, whatever conclusion you come to, you ultimately have to walk away with the understanding that he actually was trying to do something good for this country. He may have been wrong about that. He may have been naive about that and foolish about that, but he did have the interests of this country in mind when he did what he did.
Thanks.
You're very welcome.
Do you think a new administration will be better for trying to secure his release?
To me, the only thing that will bring Bob's story to a conclusion, and I believe more than anything, I would like to see that happen for his family. You know, having gotten to know his family over the course of what is now almost 9.5 years. I want them to have closure. They deserve closure. They did not wish this upon themselves. They did not do anything to bring them this upon themselves. And the people that took Bob and held Bob and may have allowed Bob to die are visiting a cruelty upon them that is both unimaginable and unjustifiable and baseless. There's nothing to be gained by it anymore. Where our government is concerned, the best they can do, I believe, by the Levinson family is to lay out what they know about their involvement in Iran in his case, and then let the chips fall where they may.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay. Well, anyway, it's 1 o'clock. You guys get to go back to work. I get to go back to work. Thank you so much for coming today. I really, really appreciate it, and I hope that you enjoyed the book as well. Thank you.